let's jump straight into a pretty wild statistic from our sources today. 90%, nearly 90% of all healthcare spending in the US right now goes towards treating chronic diseases. Just let that sink in for a second. 90%. It's not just a minor bump in the road. We're talking about a systemic crisis here. And really, this massive number forms the absolute bedrock of the document we're analyzing in this explainer.
Compounding that health emergency, the data shows more than 70% of American adults are now classified as overweight or obese. Now, the authors of these new guidelines are quick to point out that this isn't just genetic destiny. It's actually the predictable result of the standard American diet. You know, a diet that's become super reliant on highly processed foods mixed with an increasingly sedentary lifestyle. And maybe the most shocking part? This crisis isn't just affecting adults. Nearly 1 in 3 American adolescents, ages 12 to 17, already has pre-diabetes. 1 in 3. This specific metric gets a major spotlight in the report because it's actively undermining national readiness. Diet-driven chronic disease is actually disqualifying huge numbers of young Americans from military service right now, effectively cutting off these historic pathways to opportunity.
So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're breaking down the sweeping new 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines for Americans. According to the document itself, this represents the most significant reset of federal nutrition policy in our nation's entire history. And the fundamental message they're pushing? It's incredibly simple yet bold. Eat real food. To make sense of this massive policy shift, here's our roadmap. We'll cover America's health emergency, the real food philosophy, what foods to prioritize, what exactly to limit, and wrap up with infancy and early childhood guidelines.
Section 1. America's health emergency.
As we touched on earlier, the preamble to these new guidelines really doesn't mince words but the consequences of our current dietary habits. The authors emphasize that for decades, federal incentives have actually been promoting low-quality, highly processed foods. They argue that the focus has heavily favored pharmaceutical intervention over actual prevention. So this epidemic of preventable illness isn't just framed as an individual health problem. The document treats it as a direct threat to our long-term resilience as a nation, driven by poor policy choices and a lack of overall coordination.
Section 2, the real food philosophy. Now, looking at the source text, which is authored by the Secretaries of Health and Human Services and Agriculture, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Brooke L. Rollins, they frame this as a collaborative effort under the Trump administration to make America healthy again. They state outright that the primary goal here is to reclaim the food pyramid, strip away our reliance on highly processed foods, and return to the absolute basics of nutrient density.
The whole document really anchors on this beautifully simple definition of real food. We're talking about whole foods that actually nourish the body and fuel energy, completely free from chemical additives and heavy processing. And, importantly, the policy explicitly aims to realign our food system to better support the American farmers and ranchers who are out there actually growing and producing this real food.
Section 3, foods to prioritize.
So, based on a standard 2,000-calorie diet, here are the core dietary targets. And you're going to want to notice some major shifts here. The guidelines explicitly recommend full-fat dairy with 0 added sugars, 3 servings a day. You'll also spot 3 servings of veggies, 2 of fruits, and 2 to 4 of whole grains. Plus, for protein, they give a very specific formula, 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight.
The daily goal? Build your meals on high-quality proteins. That means animal sources like eggs, poultry, seafood, and red meat, or plant sources like beans and lentils. Then you want to surround that protein with colorful vegetables and healthy fats. The guidelines specifically call out olive oil, avocado, butter, and even beef tallow as great options, though they do include the caveat to keep your saturated fat consumption under 10% of your total daily calories.
They also give us some very specific, tactical advice for meal prep. They recommend completely swapping out the deep fryer for baking, broiling, or grilling. And when it comes to breakfast, well, sorry cereal fans, but they urge us to significantly reduce refined carbs like white bread and packaged cereals. Instead, we should prioritize fiber-rich whole grains like oatmeal to really support sustained energy throughout the day.
Now, a truly fascinating new focus in these guidelines is the explicit protection of the gut microbiome. The text notes that highly processed foods really disrupt our digestion. So, to build a healthy gut, we're urged to eat high-fiber foods and fermented foods. They specifically list sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and miso. As for hydration, the directive is incredibly simple. Choose plain or sparkling water and just ditch the sweetened drinks entirely.
Section 4. What to limit.
Because knowing what to eat is only half the battle, right? These new guidelines are incredibly strict about what we absolutely must cut out. The text explicitly tells us to avoid highly processed, packaged, ready-to-eat foods loaded with sodium and sugar. Think chips, cookies, and candy. But it goes a step further. It directs Americans to limit foods and beverages containing artificial flavors, petroleum-based dyes, and low-calorie, non-nutritive sweeteners. That literally means explicitly avoiding aspartame, sucralose, and saccharin entirely. Oh, and sodas and energy drinks, those are out too.
What's super interesting here is how the guidelines draw a hard line between the types of sugar. Naturally occurring sugars, like the ones you'd find in an apple or plain milk, are perfectly fine. But you kind of have to become a food detective to spot the added sugars. The text warns us to look out for ingredients hiding under words ending in "ose," dextrose, sucrose, maltose, or anything labeled as a syrup, especially high fructose corn syrup. To prevent us from over-consuming all these hidden additives, the guidelines actually provide concrete ceilings. While no amount of added sugar is ever recommended, they set a hard cap, absolutely no more than 10 grams of added sugar per meal. And snack limits are even tighter. Green snacks shouldn't exceed 5 grams, and dairy snacks max out at just 2.5 grams. For sodium, anyone 14 and over should stay under 2,300 milligrams a day, though highly active folks might need a bit more. Finally, regarding alcohol, the message is pretty simple. Consume less for better health and avoid it entirely if you fall into a high-risk category.
Section 5, Infancy and Early Childhood. Looking at that incredibly crucial first year of development, the guidelines highlight the vital need for a daily 400 IU vitamin D supplement starting shortly after birth. And here's a piece of advice that might actually surprise some people. For infants at high risk for peanut allergies, maybe due to severe eczema or egg allergies, the guidelines recommend introducing peanut butter as early as 4 to 6 months. You just do it safely by thinning it out with breast milk or formula. By 6 months, other solids and diverse allergens should be introduced. Then, right at 12 months, infant formula should be completely replaced with whole milk. The crucial point here is that around 6 months of age, instead of just blindly watching the calendar, parents should be watching for specific developmental cues before introducing real food textures like meat, vegetables, and whole grains. Can the child sit up? Can they easily control their head and neck? Do they swallow the food instead of pushing it back out onto their chin? Those are your key indicators of true readiness.
Once toddlers are eating solid foods, the guidelines emphasize that full-fat dairy is absolutely essential to meet their high-energy needs and really fuel that rapid brain development. And for the parents out there, the authors note a very important and probably all too familiar behavioral fact. It can take 8 to 10 exposures before a young child is actually willing to accept a new food. So whatever you do, don't give up on that broccoli just yet. Keep offering those colorful vegetables and whole foods. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. We've seen that staggering 90% of healthcare spending tied directly to chronic disease. And we've just walked through the government's historic shift, urging us to abandon highly processed ingredients. So, knowing the immense cost of the standard American diet, what small change can you make today to reclaim your health, cut out those chemical additives, and start eating real food? Definitely think about it the next time you look at your plate. Thanks so much for exploring this with us today.